No. No.
It's just conversation.
Just voices.
I thought it kind of ruined the mood if I put it here because I could block your face. So it's out there.
It's probably the best for this side of the class to not see my face. I mean, like.
Oh, no, that's okay. Do you want to have this like somewhere too?
Sure. I can scoot there, and then I can be.
Don't you dare.
Is your in-group
When
audio
you guys
tape?
are all around, they'll be signing out.
Okay.
I heard that Scott was having travel issues.
Yeah, he's not able to.
Is it
Health.
okay if I yoink this or do you want
You can yoink it. Yeah.
Okay.
So is your in-room audio tape? That's that you project really good, like your outside voice. Because whatever
Okay.
you give me, I can amplify through there. But if you can't hear it through there, they can't hear either.
Got it. Thank you.
Like,
My phone is charging, so I can have the official time.
Forget otherwise. I have my notes here.
No life.
Huh?
Love it. Very nice. Install for time. Do you know any jokes?
Not that I would tell. While representing a profession that I'm in. Kane could probably get away with a little more.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh, he asked if I had any jokes, and I said none that I could tell without compromising being an educator. Representing my profession, you could probably get away with a little more.
Well, my editor's here, so I
Oh,
gotta be
yeah.
careful.
That's true. That's true.
I do think it's really funny to be like talking about Kidlit wearing this like Dexter lanyard.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. My favorite kidlit of all.
Yeah.
Yes. Even serial killers were children ones, too.
I had high school students that were Dexter. But
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was reading just Stephen King way too young, so a lot of us,
Yeah.
I think, became writers.
Michael Crichton.
I had like a 8-year-old in one of my classes that was just like telling me like her favorite Friday the 13th movies.
Oh, yeah.
And her mom was like mortified. I was like, look, I'm not your parent.
I'm like,
okay?
yeah,
I
you can
can-
decide. Yeah. Yeah, I'll have kids talking about like Squid Games and Five Nights at Freddy's. I'm like, you are
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I'm like, if it's just me and the kid, like whatever, clearly your parent let you do it. But if it's like with another kid, I'm like, yeah, this is mixed company. I'm gonna pretend I'm the scared one. So we can get out of this.
Those boundaries.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
boundary lines.
I kind of like conveying them a little bit that I'm like, okay, the general tone for everyone, we're going to be very like appropriate. But if you say the name of a movie to me, I'll be like, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, because I think that's also cueing to them, like,
Yeah, like,
you
I
can
get it.
match this tone too. Like,
Yeah.
we both
Yeah.
know about other things, but
Yeah.
here's what we're doing right now.
Reading those parts of the room.
Yeah.
Christian's okay.
Hope so, too.
There she is.
Hey.
Hush falls over the cloud. We love that.
Oh no.
Congratulations on your dissertation award.
Is it nice to meet you? Okay, that's good call.
Take 3 deep breaths and then make. Because I'll introduce your name, and then I'll have you talk a little bit about yourselves. I'll do the why comics question and then the questions we had in the email.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Express Your Emanata, using graphic text for social emotional learning. I do want to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Unfortunately, Scott McLeod could not make it today. If you are going to leave because of that, please at least pretend to get a phone call so it doesn't hurt our feelings. I would appreciate that. But he did want to be here. Unfortunately, circumstances came up last minute. So he is with us in spirit because I assume all of us on this panel have been influenced by his work. But we're going to forge ahead. I'll introduce each member and on this absolutely esteemed, accomplished panel and allow them to tell you a little bit about themselves and also to answer the question, why comics? So first, I'm just going to go in the order we have on the panel here. Dr. Jason DeHart.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. I am an educator primarily. I started out in middle grades. I taught middle grades, 8th grade for 8 years. I spent 8 years in 8th grade. Absolutely, absolutely. Loved many moments of it. I can't say every moment of it, but really enjoyed it. I've done some work at the high school level. I'm currently doing that. Worked at the college level. And I wrote a book, Building Critical Literacy and Empathy with Graphic Novels. I'm so glad that title, oh, thanks. So glad that title is right there because I can never remember all the words in every order that they come in. Let's see, I do a podcast. I think I featured everyone who is on this panel at one point or another.
And it's
I do
called?
believe Words, Images, and Worlds. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and anywhere fine podcasts are sold. And that's a little bit about what I do. Literacy advocate is what I really like to aim for and what I'm passionate about. And comics were a big part of my history. They were a big part of my literacy history growing up. I would credit comics as helping me move beyond the required readings in school. I would be complicit with those readings many times because I tried to be a, air quotes, good kid. But if I wanted to read something that I really actually wanted to read and read more of, it was usually something comics or comics adjacent. So that passion has just lived on. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And next we have Dr. Christian Hines.
Trap size, so I have to adjust my mic. So hello, I'm Dr. Christian Hines. I'm currently an assistant literacy professor at Texas State. I was previously a high school teacher in Florida, and I use comics and pop culture in my classrooms with my high school students, and I also use them now teaching pre-service teachers, and I have also used Jason's wonderful book to talk about critical literacies with my pre-service teachers with graphic novels. For me, thinking about comics has two different kind of places for me. I grew up looking at like X-Men, the animated series, which kind of led me to the X-Men comics, and reading Archie Andrews, my favorite original certified lover boy. That little redhead was driving a lot of people crazy. So thinking about like adolescence in comics and how we see ourselves and things that were pictured in it for me, reading those type of comics, but also never really seeing like young black kids. So like reading Static from Milestone or even like Huey Freeman from the Boondocks. And then when I became a teacher, allowing my students to like make their own stories and them like turning me into like more comics and manga. So thinking about like the ways that I saw myself in comics and the way I wanted my students to see themselves in comics are kind of the reasons why I use comics and pop culture in the classroom and teaching pre-service teachers how to use them for not only literacies but to connect and also kind of show like kids growing up in this new visual age. So yeah.
And one thing Dr. Hines did not mention is that she recently won the Comic Studies Society Dissertation Prize for #The Kids Are All Right, interrogating and enacting youth empowerment via comics pedagogies in a high school book club. Fantastic. And Kane Lynch.
Hi, I started making comics in 4th grade, which was right after my parents had split up, and my teacher in 4th grade thought that I must have a nutritional deficiency because I was a vegetarian, because I just spent all my time in the library drawing comics instead of playing sports. But for me, making comics was so connected to kind of like processing big feelings, and so as an adult, I both do comics for kids that are, you know, about kind of dealing with hard stuff, and also I really like working with kids to kind of get over the speed bumps to make making comics easier for them.
Fantastic. Thank you. Last and least, my name is Jana Tropper. By day, I'm a speech and language pathologist in a public elementary school working with students kindergarten through 5th grade. Every once in a while, they'll throw me a curveball like a parochial or middle school, but K-5 is my bread and butter. By evening, weekend, and federal holiday, I write comics. They can be found on the Epic platform. They're the Animal Rescue Friends series and Seeker Society, and then they're published by Anders McMeel. It has been an absolute joy to be able to, I think it's technically racketeering, make comics and then use them with students. Yeah, so it's been wonderful being able to explore language in that way and use that with students. For why comics, as I hear people who create comics give interviews, they often talk about how they were drawn to comics because there was something very difficult going on in their life from a young age, and it was such a wonderful escape for them. Or they said they struggled with reading, and that was a way to get to content without the gatekeeping that comes with decoding. And I realized, like, I was a good reader, and my childhood was very average, and I actually kind of, to be honest, didn't read comics until college. I looked down on it a little bit. I thought it was a lesser thing. So I am the villain of the story, unfortunately. So it is continuing to use comics and promote comics is a very humbling experience because I was so incredibly wrong, and it's also a joy because what else am I wrong about? What else am I going to get to discover? So it's a fantastic medium. You're all here to celebrate that, hopefully, otherwise you're in the wrong room again. Just pretend to get a phone call. But we're glad to have you here, and I would love to know a little bit more about you guys. So can you raise your hand if you are an educator? You provide direct instruction. Fantastic. Raise your hand if you are a librarian. Fantastic. Raise your hand if you were an accountant and got dragged here. All right. Any other literacy type related jobs anyone wants to shout out so that we can kind of tailor our responses to who's in the room? I feel like I covered most of you, but certainly there were some people that didn't. Editor, fantastic, fantastic. So when we talk about the procedures of comics, then you can listen with a professional ear. And comic creators, yes, writers and artists, for sure, and we've got some on this panel also. So we'll get into it, and we are going to start with graphic novels, comics, manga. I'm going to use Scott McCloud's sequential art term to cover that whole thing, because I don't want to say it applies to one, not the other. Comic strips, political cartoons, whatever it is, sequential art. I want to talk about how that specifically is the tool that we use. So what features of sequential art texts have you found most valuable for direct instruction with students?
Shall I take that first?
Whoever is moved to respond may.
I'm sitting here first, so I will be glad to.
Or in order to.
Yeah, I'll be glad to begin the conversation. One of the things I know my students are very often drawn to, I recognize the irony of saying drawn to, is the facial expressions, the character representations. It's really interesting to ask a student what is happening in their mind when they're reading, because it's an invisible process. Someone should really write a book about understanding comics and how it's like a visible art and an invisible art at the same time. Someone should really get on that. But
It just needs a title.
I know, I know. I'll dream in the McClouds on that. But yeah, it seems that there's this unique sort of like marriage or jambalaya or marinade of materials and tools that come together in comics. And I won't say that it captures every reader, because all students are different and bring strengths and areas of interest and focus, but certainly a tool for the arsenal that I love to have on my shelf and in my instruction.
I just I'll jump off of that because the visual part is a lot of what draws me and my students into that too. One particular title that I can think of that I use a lot in my classrooms and that I've seen kids have been drawn to is Guts by Raina Telgemeier. And I remember reading that book in 2019 as an educator and looking at like the green facial expressions when she was sick, the butterflies in the tummy, and making those connections, and then bringing that into the classroom and talking about that with students. And one of my students brought up the connection between, if you all have ever seen Steven Universe, there's a song called Here's a Thought with Garnet and Connie, and it talks about the same thing about anxiety. And it's the same thing, like having these facial expressions, having this representation, but also thinking about what it is to look at a kid going through anxiety and having that illustrated and depicted. So being able to talk about the students about the things that they see, not only with facial expressions but color, and looking at color palettes and looking at emotions and things of that nature. So those are the colors and the actual physical illustrations of different things like anxiety or like mental illness, or even just like racial, cultural, ethnic representations are a lot of the things that my students point out, and also a lot of things for me personally that draw me into comics.
I feel like the fact that a lot of kids' comics now, like the kids are very aware of the hand that created it, is also really powerful. That experienced that, and so that's coming through in the text and the visuals, that the person drawing that upset face had that feeling, and they are grabbing a pen or a proverbial pen and putting it down. And I think that's something that's different from decades past, or maybe you love how Todd McFarlane draws Spider-Man, but you're not making the connection to him drawing Spider-Man and him flying around the city, but we have that more visceral link.
Fantastic. And to connect with what Dr. Hines said about showing the butterflies to show anxiety, that's pulling in idioms. And that's an example of Emanata, by the way. Emanata is an abstract icon that shows an internal state. So storm cloud above somebody that's upset. If you're old enough, you know the 3 stars when they're drunk or dizzy, that kind of thing. Idea, light bulb, that kind of thing. So you're showing an internal state. I would say the feature I use the most is probably the gutter, the space between the panels, because students have to infer. They have to make an educated guess, and I make them prove it. So why do you think that's what happened between this one and that one? And text evidence is also the art evidence. They say, oh, well, he was there before, and you could see his knee is bent, so he got up. So we have a comprehension piece. My students that are working more complex sentences are going to have to use clauses that they might not otherwise have used. So I think just being able to talk about the transitions between the panels has been a really helpful one for me.
If I can I jump in and make an
By all
additional
means.
recommendation? Stunt Boy in the Meantime, Raoul III and Jason Reynolds. Also a great book for illustrating feelings of anxiety and sort of tapping into your inner superhero when all of the world seems to be falling apart. And I'll also say that emphasizing the intentional choices that authors and artists make is something that comes through so beautifully in comics, whether it's in shading, in panel layouts, whatever it happens to be. I think it's a wonderful way to show that an author, an artist is making their mark and exploring it with great intention, and usually not more than 10 revisions, usually.
I'm going to piggyback off of your piggyback. We're just riding it all together.
We love it. We love it.
Because you made me think about the colors. Tony Weaver Jr., who's actually here and doing a signing, his book Weirdo, very good panel. Number one, when we're talking about like mental health and illnesses and things like that, or even just kids expressing anxiety or even like suicidal ideation. There are these panels where the character, who is Tony, is actively going through depression, and you see the colors start being muted until they go like into like this grayish black and white, and being able to talk through that with students about how the world is not as colorful, it's not as beautiful when you're going through your own issues and your own depression. And I would recommend that book too, as well as Jerry Craft's New Kid, when Jordan is doing his drawings, and he's doing his drawings in black and white as opposed to like the entire graphic novel that's in color. So being able to talk to kids about how they see the world in binaries and how it can transition into full colors, or their emotions dictate how they see the world. So I think about those things too. And those are also some really good titles to pick up.
Fantastic. I remember once I also run a comic book club for my 4th and 5th graders, and I had a student tell me that all of the Garfield comic strips were wrong. And I asked him to elaborate, and he said, because Garfield, Jim Davis drew a thought bubble and not a speech bubble. And I said, well, why do you think Garfield's talking? So we had to go back. Does John ever respond in a way that indicates he heard what Garfield said that wouldn't be otherwise read through body language? So we went through it, and turns out Jim Davis did know what he was doing. But it was a moment where we just asked questions to get to the answer. I didn't tell him, like, no, of course he did it. Just let's Socratic question our way to a reasonable conclusion. Let's infer from here. So that was a fantastic opportunity. So how have you found the use of the features that are in sequential art, like Emanata, onomatopoeia, supporting in student instruction, and when you have them make comics, their response, how are they using those? We can go in order.
Okay, just making sure. I don't want to talk over anybody. So when I started using comics in the classroom, I'll actually back up to when I didn't, because I too went on sort of a stream of are comics literature, do they belong in the classroom, what is a book? I was in a master's program, and they were telling me about the wonders of John Steinbeck and reminding me about how John Updike and lots of other authors named John really attract close reading. They don't always attract students necessarily, but they lend themselves to that analysis. So at first I didn't use comics really at all. I started by having students make them. And it was the end of my second year. We had this weird month after the big state test that we all know things about. And it was like, well, we can go roll people's cars in the parking lot, or we can do something creative in the classroom. And I think the principal prefers that we stay inside and leave everybody's parking lot space alone. And so I had students making their own characters. We were doing sort of like a noun and adjective mix-up and coming up with these different features. And I realized that nearly everything that I could teach or review through having kids do bubble sheets could actually be done through comics. I don't know of a single ELA standard that can't be done through comics in some way. And it was so popular, it was so engaging that I continued using that method. And so it really started with a making process. And I find that students that are drawn to art can express themselves in ways that they might not necessarily otherwise be able to. Had a student with a speech diverse ability who was using a device to communicate and would do painting and responses to reading and different things that we had read and studied using visuals. And so it opens up a wealth of language opportunities, and it's just cool. I mean, not to keep giving book recs, but I was a former librarian. At one time I was a librarian, so Karate Prom, Kyle Starks, because they can also be fun. They can be areas of study, but they can also be really, really just a good time as well.
Okay, Jason with the soft flex. I'm like, I used to be a librarian.
Once upon a time.
Total package.
Yes, we love it. Librarian, teacher, author, podcaster.
I did not realize that was a soft flex, but thank you.
International
Yes.
You
super
just
spy.
casually dropped it. We love
Exactly.
it. We
Watch your
love
toes.
librarians. Kind of the same thing for me. I was an ELA teacher, but I had a lot of the ELA electives in my class, and particularly one class, creative writing. We were reading Speak, and then the Speak graphic novel by Lori Halse Anderson came out. So we were talking about illustrating that and having students create their own of what type of facial expressions would you make to relay how you are feeling if you are suddenly not able to talk or you're choosing not to talk. And we started doing one-pagers, and then they would start creating these one-pagers, and then they had so many ideas. Of course, it came off the one page, and I was like, you can't use words, you can only use visuals. And then we moved from like one-pagers to making zines, and them being able, first of all, to have that critical thinking of, if it's easy to say if I'm angry, but if I'm nervous or if I'm unsure, like what am I doing? And then they would practice like, well, let's draw an emoji, and then let's start transforming the emoji into what you would look like. Or I would give them like free reign, like go online and Google these emotions and look at different visual images. So they were able to not only illustrate their emotions, but it actually got us having a conversation and a dialogue about our emotions and how we feel and how we carry them and how we express them and how we express them non-verbally and how we can recognize those things in others. Because some of the students, they will be like, well, somebody, like I would just rather tell somebody I'm mad, or if I'm mad, they should know. I'm like, but what if they don't know? Like, how do we express that, or how do we feel? I'm like, or I can tell by some of you when you walk into the class when you're And I was like, you didn't tell me that you didn't want to be here or whatever happened, but I saw it. And I'm like, well, let's talk about drawing it. So being able to have like that critical dialogue and being able to offer them a space where they could be creative, and albeit they had that choice because I was in an elective, but being able to think about that, to take it to their other teachers to kind of do like these multi-genre, multimodal projects. And there were other ELA teachers that were doing that, but there were some that weren't. And then being able to be like, oh, well, Christian, we heard about what you were doing in your class, and I decided to adopt that in my class, and being able to allow the kids to express themselves more creatively. Those are some of the things that I did in when I was working in high school in K-12. Some of the things that I do now, teaching my literacy courses, is being able to, once again, tell pre-service teachers how to do that, but also, because we have much more technology now than when I was in the classroom, being able to have them use like different apps like Canva, Pixton, Storyboard, and having them create comics. And I'm like, I usually tell them, because some of them will be like, well, I don't read graphic novels, I don't do comics, I don't do illustrations. Or if they're like me, they're like, well, I can't draw. And I was like, trust me, I can't even draw a straight stick figure. I was like, it would be lean in, crooked. I was like, but you put me in front of a computer, I'll design anything. So I would tell them to do an illustration about their last year in high school, and then do an illustration about their first year in college, so they can kind of see like the emotions that went when they were leaving one place, and the emotions that they started to have again when they're entering a new place, and watching them create those stories and create those images where they're expressing emotions of, I'm elated to graduate, I'm an adult now, I'm going out, but then turning back into, well, now I'm a freshman in college again, and I'm nervous and I'm unsure, but I'm excited and I don't know, and having them talk about those emotions and using those as projects, or suggesting them as projects that they can have their students do on the first days of school. So now making those type of digital comics, those are things that we do now in my literacy classes, and especially when we're talking about big emotions and having like Emanata and things like that.
I think one of the most educational opportunities for me in teaching comics was when I had a gig in an after-school program. Because if you're going into a classroom and it's the middle of a school day, comics is the most fun thing they could be doing that day, right? But it's after school. They're just like, their parents couldn't pick them up yet or whatever. And then a lot of the kids were playing soccer. And I started thinking like, man, it's a nice day out. I might, like, I don't play soccer, but like, I don't know if I can compete with this, honestly. So I started having to design activities that were basically so high engagement that they couldn't resist doing that. And a lot of that was trying not to make it feel like work, where like there are kids, and I love the kids who are, you give them a blank piece of paper, they'll draw a whole comic in 10 minutes, right? But a lot of kids are like, yeah, they love reading them, but maybe they're not disciplined enough to do all that, or they just rather play soccer that day, right? And so I tried to sort of design activities that break the elements of making a comic up discreetly, where you're only doing one thing at a time, you know. And if you give a kid a drawing, the first thing they're going to do is like draw a mustache on all the people, or try to mess with it, right? And so just like scaffolding toward that a little bit can create some really interesting opportunities. And Emanata is a great example of something where like, okay, do some little squiggles around their head. How did that change how the drawing feels? And kind
That's
of
fantastic.
use that to an educational goal.
Very good. Yeah, it is hard to compete with soccer on a nice day, but it's fantastic that you found a way.
Inside right now. It's so beautiful in San Diego.
Yes. But the idea of scaffolding it from, you don't have to do the whole comic, not being overwhelmed by the enormity of what's being asked to do, because they're from day one, they're comparing themselves to Raina Telgemeier, they're comparing themselves to Jerry Kraft, and they're wondering, you know, and I have to remind my students too, you haven't put in your 10,000 hours. This is not where you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be where you are.
Yeah, and I do think just like trying to get them putting something down is like that's the biggest barrier, you know. And if you really look at like, I don't know, the way I draw a face is like, it's not that far off from a smiley face, you know. Like you're talking about working from emoji, you know. Like I feel like they have that, once they see that finished product, they get intimidated. But if you're like, okay, take a beat, you can draw a little smiley. You can put some hair on it. Now it's a person.
Yeah, if anyone is familiar with XKCD, that is an incredibly popular webcomic that is literally just stick figures. It doesn't even have balloons. It has a line to whatever the dialogue is, and it is incredibly popular and funny, and it takes on larger topics and things like that in a couple short panels.
I feel like a lot of kids say that who genuinely draw about as good as me. You know,
Yeah.
they just don't think they do. And then I see the face they drew, and I'm like, oh, that really, that's hitting that emotional beat way better than I could.
Yeah, and it's tough because they're also comparing their first draft to someone else's last draft.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about, I also run a 4th and 5th grade comic book club, and we have a lot of mantras in there, and one of them is done is better than good, because they'll sit there agonizing and erasing the same exact bubble forever. I've tried to convince them to write the dialogue first and then do a bubble around it, but they insist on drawing tiny balloons and cramming the letters in. If anybody has any tips on how to break these students of that, it has literally been 12 years of me trying to do it, so.
I have one tip which I may or may not work. but
I will
it's-
take anything, man.
Something I've done is I think the hardest thing with a lot of kids who are trying to do something more ambitious is that like they don't want to hear that they have to do several drafts. You know,
Yeah.
that like Randa Tuckelmeyer did 4 drafts to get that finished page he liked. You know, and so sometimes I'll have them do a rough draft on graph paper, because then you don't have to worry about drafting tools very much, because you can trace a graph paper line without a ruler, and then it's pretty easy to get all your borders down. There's lines for your words, and you know, if they pointedly refuse to write the words down, what can you do?
Yeah.
I guess, but it just like it sort of feels set up for writing words, right? There's just
I like that.
lines there. And then also because it's on graph paper, that can't be the final draft, right?
That's a
then
sneaky
if you use that
trick.
especially if you have a light table or something like
Uh-huh.
that, which you know you can get those quite inexpensively.
Okay.
And then if you have them do another draft where they're sort of tracing their graph paper version onto a clean sheet of paper, it kind of feels like a magic trick to them.
That's a fantastic, and it doesn't feel like restarting from scratch because
Yeah.
they're doing the tracing. That is a fantastic idea. Thank you. They just want their letters to be so tiny, and I just can't convince just a generation of students to do it. So thank you. That is a brand new idea I will implement. Any other? Actually, this next question is a perfect segue to it. So, how do you approach making comics with students? Kane, you already spoke on this in detail. If you have any additional thoughts to that, but you can talk about the logistics of it, the philosophy of it, things that you have done that have crashed and burned, things you have done that have been successful, and how that's maybe changed with the different cohorts of students that you've worked with. Jason.
Has anyone else had a student say, "Can I just write this? Do I have to draw?"
Every time.
Yes.
Yes.
And my answer is yes. So we keep it a pretty open process whenever we're making comics or most anything. I try to say yes more than no to most creative decisions. Most reasons to leave the room, probably not. But creative decisions are usually a yes. So I think creating open territories for students to respond is something that I've enjoyed doing a lot. I had students this past year use technology to do sort of a first draft just to kind of see what it looked like and then go back and kind of respond in their own way with more traditional tools. I would love to explore more with like collage comics, photo comics, and some of those pieces. And we're probably all familiar with Making Comics, Linda Berry, which is a great book that just shows there's not one way to do it. It's a medium, it's not a genre, and so you can tell any story that you really want to tell through comics. I've used them to look at history, I've used them to look at personal narrative. Superheroes, of course, always bubble up in some way, but it's really an open ground for creating. And we get to learn more about our students. Anytime they share with us through what they make or write or respond, we learn a little bit. So we get to know them really well through that process too.
Some of the things I kind of mentioned before, like we do a lot of digital comics in my classes now with the pre-service teachers. Before, I usually just tell them to just start with an idea or just tell me how you're feeling. That's usually how we start because like you all said, they think about the end product, like how am I going to write a whole story? How am I going to express multiple ideas? And I'll just be like, just tell me how you feel today. Draw a panel of what are you feeling right now? Or I'll start with, how did you feel on the first day of class? And usually they'll do that, or some of them, like, I can't think about it. I'll be like, well, pull up your favorite GIF, and what does that look like? And then illustrate that in your own way. So we start talking about that. Some of them are great artists who, like you said, they'll be like, I can't draw, and then next thing I know, they're like drawing the next like Marvel comic or the next manga. And I was like, okay, can't draw. I was like, clearly we were being modest. I'm like, that is absolutely phenomenal. So being able to hype them up in that way. And also, I tell the others who are like me, my favorite comic to create was a Bitmoji. I was like, because a Bitmoji always expresses how I feel and the things that I see. So I'll tell them, I was like, create your own. And they'll do that, and then it just explodes for them into all of the different scenes they can create, the different places they can put themselves in. So the digital comics for me has been very popular, and I always allow them the autonomy of, if you don't want to do it, draw it if you want, create a digital one if you want, or like you said, when they want to write, I would like, well, maybe write a sentence or two and then draw a picture to go with that sentence, and that usually will prompt them into that. So digital comics right now, and then allowing them that autonomy.
I want to hop in there because I have something to say with the I can't draw. I get the same thing from 4th and 5th graders. Either they have absolutely zero doubts about themselves and they're like, back up, and then just go through reams of paper, or it's like the, shaking hand over the paper. Like, there's not a lot of in the middle at that age. So when I've had kids saying I can't draw, I say, you can't draw as well as you'd like to yet. We're adding yet on the end. I'm sure as educators you've all heard you have to add at yet because of growth mindset, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, one of them turned on me one day when I had passed out something to all of them, but I had another one, and I said, who doesn't have one? They all stared at me, and I said, I'm holding an extra, so certainly someone doesn't have one. And, stare back and forth, and then I realized someone was absent. I'm like, oops, sorry about that, I'm dumb. And another student said, no, Mrs. Tropper, you're just not smart yet.
Roasted.
Love it.
So,
That's a mug or a T-shirt or something.
yeah, you're
that's
just,
waiting to
Mrs.
happen.
Tropper, you're just not smart yet. Talk about, this whole, again, comics are a exercise in humility.
Something that maybe this is most relevant to the librarians in the room, but I really enjoy doing comics workshops that have a diverse age range, because I think people have an initial reaction that like, oh, like if you have a class with a 7-year-old and a 17-year-old, how are you even going to talk to both of them? But in fact, I think they have a lot to learn from each other, and like really the bigger that age difference is, the more that the 17-year-old's like, okay, like I'm with a child, we're not peers, and that's okay. But then they start to notice that like, oh, well, I'm like worrying about 3-point perspective in this panel, and that 7-year-old's drawn like 4 panels of a unicorn fighting Godzilla. And so then you start, I think they get something out of that. Like, actually, that comic by that 7-year-old kind of rocks. Maybe I don't need to spend so long. And then the 7-year-old sees like, oh, they're like taking the time to, they're going to spend this whole time actually drawing. They're not going to run out and play soccer or whatever. And so I think it is kind of an interesting, like, they're different tides lifting each other's boats kind of situation.
Fantastic. Anyone else want to weigh in on other creation of comics comments?
I'll just mention, I think all of us have worked in a comics club or comics workshop context at some point. So that speaks to the power of making room somewhere in the school day, even if it's after the school day for exploring.
I think for me as a creator, like every comic I've ever made, I'm like, man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to draw all that. Like, I don't feel like I'm necessarily a incredible draft person, and it's intimidating every time. But I'm excited about telling the story, so that's what kind of gets me there. And so I sort of try to have that, like, inspire that attitude in them, that like, okay, we're not going to be thinking about how to draw a car. We're thinking about where that car's going, And then if you can get them to like invested in trying to get the idea out, then that will hopefully short circuit some of those roadblocks.
Very good. I think those are excellent tips to keep in mind. So before we turned over to Q&A, I did ask the panelists to brainstorm some title recommendations of books they think would be great for students, and perhaps not the same ones you see on every top 10 list. So I will kick it off. I always recommend The Arrival by Sean Tan. It is a gradient, sepia-colored comic that has absolutely no words. It is my dream someday that a school district adopts it as a one book, one district, because kindergartners can access it all the way up through high school seniors. It is a phenomenal story about somebody moving to a new land to provide for their family, and there's some incredible symbolism and imagery in there, and the older the students get, the more background information they have, the more they can tie it to world events and history. I think it's just a phenomenal piece of work. And also Victoria Jr. by Manny Tremblay. I backed it on Kickstarter a million years ago. It is about a little girl being raised by a Frankenstein monster, and a lot of different adventures with a lot of different art styles. Also, speaking of Kickstarter, if everyone can go to Kickstarter on their phone right now and look up Midnight Mystics. There's a
Excellent.
Kickstarter right now for Midnight Mystics. It is a fantasy anthology written by African American and drawn by African American women. It is like 50-something hours from ending. It has not met its goal, and it would be fantastic if you considered it.
Stephanie Williams is in there.
Yes, and she's
Ryan
also
Oakley.
appearing here.
Yeah, wonderful stuff. If you haven't checked out the work of Kane Lynch and Janet Tropper, I'll go ahead and mention that.
Thanks.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We will be signing after.
That's look
That's
at the
right,
20th.
and they will be signing after. Thank you. Yeah, I'll also mention "Call Me Iggy" by Jorge Aguirre. I was looking in sort of the YA area as I was thinking about these. It's a really cool mixture of like personal narrative, slice of life that also meets some magical realism. So "Call Me Iggy," Jorge Aguirre. Ash's Cabin does some of that same kind of work or same territory in a different way by Jen Wong. And then I'll mention a couple of names of some author-artist combos and really recommend anything that they do. Nicole Gu, who happens to be here at the con as well, that's G-O-U-X. Laura Gao, G-A-O. And, there was one more. Yeah, what was it? It was on
We
my
co-
phone.
We can come back to you.
I'll circle back to it.
It'll pop in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Fantastic. Dr. Hines?
I have a couple, and I also picked up some from the library. So I am a big fan of memoirs and having students read memoirs and then thinking about their own story, especially talking about like adolescence. So having teachers think about adolescence and the kids that they're doing, but also when I was in the classroom with students, having them think about their coming of age. So there's this really good book, Mexikid, that came out. Beautiful, beautiful graphic memoir. It is a middle grade memoir. There are also some Star Wars references. I'm also a big fan of comics and graphic novels that talk about being a young kid as a nerd. There's also When Stars Are Scattered. I definitely highly recommend that. Now, some of my favorites, I said it before, but I'll say it again. Tony Weaver Jr. has Weirdo. Weirdo is absolutely amazing, about a kid who loves like anime, who loves like pop culture, is a nerd, but then they also they find themselves trying to figure out where they fit in and realizing that they don't need to fit in anywhere, they just need to be themselves. So you can pick that up here at the con or probably at the library. Timid by Jonathan Todd, another book about a kid who draws comics, who wants to be a cartoonist, and they're moving to a new state, so trying to find themselves, but also finding their local comic book shop and finding other kids that relate to like their nerdiness, their weirdness. So another like coming of age story. New Kid by Jerry Craft and Class Act. I prefer Class Act. A lot of people do New Kid, so I like to say Class Act because I feel like Class Act delves a little bit deeper, but also being able to talk about different topics of like colorism, different microaggressions that kids experience when they are in school, and being able to, as an educator, see these things depicted, but so you can interrogate whether you have any biases, but also think about how your students are processing life and any microaggressions and biases that they may face before they even get into your classroom, to kind of think about their social emotional learning. So I love what Jerry Craft did in Class Act, so I always recommend that. Swim Team by Johnny Christmas. Amazing, beautiful story about this little black girl who has to join a swim team and she can't swim. So her neighbor teaches her how to swim, but not only with teaching her how to swim, she kind of teaches her a lot of the history of why black people were not allowed to be in pools and how civil rights and the different activism. So you have a historical component there. You still have that visual. You learn a lot. And also, as a person who also had to learn how to swim as an adult, I think it is a beautiful beautiful graphic novel of how that's depicted. And also going back to the nerd, Johnny Christmas has a new one called Gamerville, about a kid who plays game and their parents force them to go to a summer camp, and they're trying to compete in this gaming competition, but also they're learning how to make friends at this camp, and the illustrations there, the different things that they have to do to try to get back to the gamer competition is actually depicted as a game, and it kind of has, for me, like this whole adventure epic quest, like Dungeons and Dragon feel to it. So that's another entryway to talk to kids about things that they're doing, but also figuring out how they can relate like their games to their real life and building those bridges and those connections. So the Johnny Christmas, Jonathan Todd, the Jerry Craft, and the last one is Brownstone by Samuel Tier. Beautiful, beautiful graphic novel about gentrification, about being able to relate to parents that you may not know, finding yourselves. A beautiful illustration. I'm pretty sure all of us can go down forever, but those are the ones that I can think of off top that may not be on like award list, but they're beautiful, beautiful graphic novels about coming of age and finding yourself. And they're all between middle grade and YA. So if you are educators, they should be in your library. If not, have your librarians order them. I guarantee your kiddos will love it.
I do. That was an amazing list. I cannot compete with that. But I'm really excited about graphic novels that are sort of, in a lot of these middle grade and YA books are about kids facing difficult stuff, right? And the ones that are about sort of like bigger systemic issues or just sort of like reckoning with the world we're in and the uncertain future, like I think how hard it must be to be a kid today in ways that we could not fathom when we were younger. I think Brownstone and Ash's Cabin are both excellent examples of that. So beat me to it. I'd add Wildfire by Brianna Bard, which is about kind of reckoning with climate change and losing your home, and just like it's a fascinating one to me because you can't resolve that issue in a 200-page graphic novel, right? So how do you tell us a satisfying story with a cathartic ending about an unsolvable problem? So that one was really fascinating to me.
I think books like that are very important, though, because we don't ask kids to solve the problem, but if a kid can be affected by something, they should be exposed to it and addressed in a way that is age appropriate, appropriate to their personal maturity, and that kind of thing. So we should be bringing up the hard issues comforted within that graphic text and retelling in a less intimidating way. I think that's a fantastic point.
Yeah. Totally on the other end, I feel like working with kids drawing, Dave Pilkey is such an icon of kind of creating characters that you feel like you could draw them, right? And that's so compelling to kids, and that gets them drawing, and I love that. Another book that I think does that is the First Cat in Space Ate Pizza. That was one of my recent favorites. And that is like, it's got that kind of like, I love Rocky and Bullwinkle when I was a kid. I feel like it has some of that, like every panel of this cracks me up. And also a kid looking at it can be like, oh yeah, I think I could probably draw that. So it gets kids excited about reading and creating.
Fantastic. Did the name come to you?
It did. It's Paloo of the Woods. It's grief-centered, loss-centered. It's actually the one that I used for the chapter on grief in the book. And that's My K Win, M-A-I-N-G-U, feel like I'm in a spelling bee, Y-E-N.
Fantastic. All right, so we've got 5 minutes. Thank you, 5. Do we have any questions? Go ahead.
In your experience, what's the point of entry for kids now for comics? Because like when I was a kid, it was the Sunday Funnies, and I taught some Girl Scouts, and they looked at me like I had 2 heads when I mentioned the newspaper. So, do you find that a lot of them come into your classes or your workshops having some experience with comics, or maybe web comics or anything like that, or are they not really exposed like day to day unless it's been brought to them?
I think kids read comics more than adults now,
Yes.
and it's mostly, it's funny because I feel like that was true 50 years ago, and then when I was a kid, I was like the only kid I knew who read comics practically, and now it's back to being like every kid in America is reading, those early reader graphic novels, and then they're graduating to Dogman and Raina and the associated books. So I think there's a pretty clear path there.
And manga too. A lot of the entryway, especially for high school kids and even the middle school kiddos and stuff that I volunteer with, most of them are reading all types of manga. They love like One Piece. They love Naruto. Like I was reading Sailor Moon. Like I did Sunday Funnies, but like my first manga was Sailor Moon. So I tell them that and they're like, Miss, no one reads that. And then they tell me about like all the 50 chapters of like Attack on Titan that they read. I was like, all right. I have my 12 books. You have your 150. We all read manga. So that has been a huge, like over the last few years, whether I'm in schools with kids or even even like my pre-service teachers, a lot of them, their newest entryway or that they read the most is that. And then I still have some that do the superhero comics, or Raina Telgemeier. So those are some of the more popular ones that I've heard them. But I will say right now, the biggest ones that I've seen was manga.
Yeah, I feel like they go through it is time to put away childish things. I'm 13 now. Diary of a Wimpy Kid goes away, and then they reach the One Piece, you know?
But then they'll go back because I'm like, oh, so it's waves. It
Yeah.
ebbs and flows.
Yeah, I find that it's a Raina Telgemeier path or a Calvin and Hobbes path. I every year still have kids that say they read Calvin and
Yeah.
Hobbes. I don't know if they're finding their parents' anthology somewhere. I don't know but
Maybe
every
it's the
year,
library.
yeah, or grabbing it from the library. But every year I've got a couple kids who when we're listing, hey, what are all the things we read? I got some Calvin and Hobbes kids. So I think some of those, even if they may not read it in a newspaper, I think they're accessing it in different ways. But I still think that some of those are persevering.
They put out the Peanuts books now to kind of emulate the look of Wimpy Kid, which is interesting to me. So I think there are kids still reading comics that we would think of as newspaper comics, but they're just getting them a different path.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Go ahead.
What would you recommend a good response is for when there's a parent and a kid? The kid wants to read comics. The parent said, comics aren't good for my kid to read. I want them to read a regular novel. How can I find a good middle ground? Are there any?
What is your role?
I'm like a library assistant.
Okay.
We often don't have librarians on the floor.
Okay. So you're a librarian. Okay.
If you want to get really argumentative, you could go on JSTOR and find the studies that have been done on child literacy.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, or you could, try to just get them to trust your authority on that. But there is, empirical data that it helps kids read.
There's
and
more
that's-
rare words per thousand in comic books over newspapers and
Yeah.
prose books. There's definitely Reading with Pictures is a nonprofit organization that their motto or their mission is to get kids in comics into classrooms and classrooms into comics. And so I'm on the board. Years ago, we did an online conference and we created a pamphlet called Why Comics. So get my business card after, and we'll contact, and I can email you that. And it's got a lot of those cited studies. So, I mean, you can laminate, just whip that right out as soon as a parent's it's not real reading. Because I think that we see pictures alongside text, and all of a sudden we decide it's lesser. But can you imagine putting together something from IKEA with just the words? And who flew here? How do you know how to get out of the airplane? Because you have a little comic book in front of you. We use pictures with text all the time with adults. It's fine with kids.
I'll
Right.
also mention Kazu Kibuishi made this point really well, that for a lot of spaces, the concern is not necessarily comics reading, but that kids aren't reading at all. And so making that point that getting them reading is a process, and it involves all the texts and all the things, and that's what we're really after, might move the conversation in some way, and absolutely recommend the research as well.
I feel like, I don't know if this is always possible in practice, but you're a professional with great experience about what works with kids, right? So I feel like I would hope a parent would be open to hearing that you can say, from personal experience, yeah.
Just no, they have to read the top 100 books that they must finish before high school. I'm okay.
Stand next to your degree and
I always want to ask that parent, what's the last book you
Right.
read?
Those
You're on
100 of
TikTok
those
right
books.
now.
have you read this book that you're pushing back on? Have you read it?
I am getting the wrap it up signal. Thank you so much for choosing to spend part of your Comic-Con experience with us. There'll be a
Thank
signing
you.
out there after.
Thank you
You're all
so much.
fantastic and wonderful. And thank you, panel, for taking time out of your day to be here.
Can I get for a sec to take a picture?
And please send me the picture as well.
Sorry. Thank you. I just forgot to get one before.
All right. Let me see if I can get a
Sure, that'd be great.
You know,
Thank
get some tickets, so you're in the picture too, right? No, give some of the tickets over. Yes. Would you like to take a picture?